Wanderer of the Wasteland by Zane Grey, Chapter 18, Part 1. July. At last the endlessly long, increasingly hot June days brought the leaden-hazed month of July, when no sane man ever attempted to cross Death Valley while the sun was high. In all hours, even in the darkness, the bold, rugged slopes of the Panamints reflected sinister shades of red, and the valley was one of gray swirling shadows and waving veils of heat like transparent smoke. Beyond that vast, strange, dim valley rose the drab and ochre slopes of the Funeral Mountains, sweeping up to the bronze battlements and on to the lilac and purple peaks blurred in the leaden-hued haze that obscured the sky. The sun was sky-broad and illimitable, with a lurid white heart into which no man could look. Adam was compelled to curtail his activities. He did not suffer greatly from the heat, but he felt its weakening power. Ever his blood seemed at fever heat. Early in the mornings and late in the evenings he prepared simple meals which, as the days dragged on, were less and ever less partaken of by his companions and himself. During the midday hours, through the terrible heat, he lay in the shade, sweltering and oppressed in a stupor of sleep. The nights were the only relief from the immense and merciless glare, the bearing down of invisible bars of red-hot iron. Most of these long hours of darkness, Adam lay awake or walked in the gloom, or sat in the awful stillness, waiting for he knew not what. But that he waited for something he knew with augmented dread. When the full blast of the summer heat came, Veery changed physically and mentally. He grew thin. He walked with bowed shoulders. His tongue protruded slightly, and he always panted. Every day he ate less and slept less than on the day before. He obeyed no demands from Adam and took no precautions. His sufferings would have been less and his strength would have been greater had he refrained from exposing himself to the sun. But he reveled in the proofs of the nature of Death Valley. And if Veery had ever worn a mask in front of Adam, he now dropped it completely. Indeed, he ignored Adam, no longer with scorn or indifference, but as if unaware of his presence. Whenever Adam wanted to be heard by Veery, which desired diminish daily, he had to block his path and confront him forcefully. Veery was given over wholly to his obsession. His hate possessed him, body and soul, and if it had ever been a primitive hate to destroy, it had been restrained and therefore rendered infinitely cruel by slow, measured process of thought, of premeditation. Often when Adam absented himself from camp, Veery had a trick of climbing the weathered slope to roll down rocks. He seemed mad to do this, yet when Adam returned, he would come clambering down, wet and spent, a haggard, sweating wretch, not yet quite beyond fear. In vain had Adam argued, pleaded, talked with him. In vain had been the strident scorn of a man and the curse of rage. Veery, however, had a dread of Adam's huge hands. Something about them fascinated him. When one of these clenched in an enormous fist was shoved under his nose with a last threat, then Veery would retire sullenly to the shack. In every way that was possible, he kept before Magdalene Veery the spectacle of his ruin and the consciousness that it was her doing. These midsummer days soon made him a gaunt, unshaven, hollow-eyed wretch, miserable and unkempt. He presented himself at meals and sat there, a haggard ghost, to mouth a little food and to stare at his wife with accusing eyes. He reminded her of cool, shaded rooms, of exquisite linen and china, of dainty morsels, of carved glass pitchers full of refreshing drink and clinking ice. Always he kept before her the heat, the squalor, the dirt, the horror of Death Valley. When he could present himself before her with his thin, torn garments clinging wet to his emaciated body, his nerves gone from useless exertions, his hands bloody and shaking as if with palsy, his tongue hanging out, when he could surprise her thus and see her shrink, then he experienced rapture. He seemed to cry out, "Woman, behold the wreck of Veri." But if that rapture for him to gloat over the doom of her seemed his glory, day by day Death Valley wrote by invisible lines and shades of havoc in Magdalene Veri's beauty. To look at her was to have striking proof that Death Valley had never been intended for a woman, no matter how magnificent her spirit. The only spirit that could prevail here was the one which had lost its earthly habiliments, like a cat playing with a mouse. Veri watched his wife, like Mephistopheles gloating over the soul of a lost woman. Veri attended to the slow manifestations of his wife's failing strength. He meant to squeeze every drop of blood out of her heart and still keep, if possible, life lingering in her. His most terrible bitterness seemed to consist of his failure to hide her utterly and forever from the gaze of any man save himself. Here he had hidden her in the most desolate place in the world, yet another man had come and, like all the others, had been ready to lay down his life for her. Veri writhed under this circumstance over which he had no control. It was really the only truth about the whole situation that he was able to grasp. The terrible tragedy of his hate was that it was not hate, but love. Like a cannibal, he would have eaten his wife raw, not from hunger, but from his passion to consume her, to incorporate her heart and blood and flesh into his, make her body his forever. Thought of her soul, her mind, her spirit never occurred to Veri. So he never realized how she escaped him, never understood her mocking scorn. But through his thick and heat-hazed brain, there must have pierced some divination of his failing power to torture her. The time came when he ceased to confront her like a scarecrow. He ceased accusing her. He ceased to hold before her the past in its contrast to the present. He gave up his refinement of cruelty. This marked in Veri a further change, a greater abasement. He reverted to instinct. He retrograded to a savage in his hate, and that hate found its outlet altogether in primitive ways. Adam's keen eye saw all this, and the slow boil in his blood was not all owing to the torrid heat of Death Valley. His great hands, so efficient and ruthless, seemed fettered. 1,000 times he'd muttered to the silences of the night, to the solemn hazed daylight, to the rocks that had souls, and to the invisible presence ever beside him. How long must I stand this? How long? How long? One afternoon, as he awoke late from the sweltering siesta, he heard Mrs. Veri scream. The cry startled him because she had never done that before. He ran, and Adam found her lying at the foot of the stone bench in a dead faint. The brown had left her skin. How white the wasted face! What dark shadows under the hollow eyes! His heart smote him remorselessly. As he knelt and was about to lift her head, he spied a huge, hairy spider crawling out of the folds of her gray gown. It was a tarantula, one of the ugliest of the species. Adam flipped it off with his hand and killed it under his boot. Then, with a basin of water, he wetted a scarf and essayed to bring Mrs. Veery back to consciousness. She didn't come quickly, but at last she stirred and opened her eyes with a flutter. She seemed to be awakening from a nightmare of fear, loathing, and horror. For that instant, her sight did not take in Adam, but was a dark, humid, dilated vision of memory. "Magdalene, I killed the tarantula," he said. "It can't harm you now. Wake up. Why, you're stiff and you look like I don't know what. You fainted and I've had a time bringing you back." "Oh," she cried, "it's you." And then she clung to him while he lifted her, steadying her upon her feet, and placed her on the stone bench. "So I fainted? Oh, that loathsome spider, where is it?" "I covered it with sand," he replied. "Would it have bitten me?" "No, not unless you grasped it." Slowly she recovered and, letting go of him, leaned back in the seat. Crystal beads of sweat stood out upon her white brow. Her hair was wet, her sensitive lips quivered. "I have a perfect horror of mice, bugs, snakes, spiders, anything that crawls," she said. "I can't restrain it. I inherited it from my mother." "And what has mine got to do with most of a woman's feelings? Veery has finally found that out." "Veery? What do you mean?" rejoined Adam. "I was leaning back here on the bench when suddenly I heard Veery slipping up behind me. I knew he was up to something, but I wouldn't turn to see what. Then with 2 sticks, he held the tarantula out over me, almost in my face. I screamed. I seemed to freeze inside, and he dropped the tarantula in my lap, then all went black." "Where is he now?" asked Adam, finding it difficult to speak. "He's in the shack." Adam made a giant stride in that direction, only to be caught and detained by her clinging hands. Earnestly she gazed up at him with melancholy, searching eyes. He uttered a loud laugh, mirthless, a mere explosion of surcharged breath. "No, I can't get angry. I can't be a man anymore. This Death Valley and the sun and you have worked on my mind, but I'll tell you what, nothing can stop me from beating Veery, so he'll never do that again." So I've worked on your mind, and it's the only great deed I ever did, Wansville. I told you Veery has threatened to shoot you. He's meant to more than once, but when you have come, he has been afraid. But he might." "I wish to heaven he'd try it," responded Adam, and loosing the woman's hold upon his hands, he strode toward the shack. "Veery, come out," he called loudly, though without any particular feeling. There was no reply, and he repeated the call, this time louder. Still, Veery remained silent. Waiting a moment longer, Adam finally spoke again with deliberate, cold voice. "Veery, I don't want to mess up that room with all your wife's belongings in there, so come outside." At that, Adam heard a quick, panting breath. Then Veery appeared. He came to the door of the shack. Adam could not have told what the man's distorted face resembled. He carried a gun, and his heart was ferocious if his will was weak. "Don't you lay one of your bloody hands on me," he panted. Adam took 2 long strides and halted before Veery, not 6 feet away. "So you've got your little gun, eh?" he queried, without any particular force. Adam had been compelled to smother all that mighty passion within him, or he could not have answered for his actions. "What are you going to do with it?" "If you make me, I'll kill you," came the husky, panting response. "Veery, I'm going to beat you within an inch of your worthless life," declared Adam. monotonously, as if he had learned this speech by rote. "But I've got to talk first. I'm full of a million things to call you." "Damn you, I'll not listen," replied Veery, beginning to shake with excitement. The idea of using the gun had become an intent and was acting powerfully upon him. "You leave my camp. You get out of this valley." "Veery, are you crazy?" queried Adam. The use of his voice had changed that deadlock of his feelings. He must not trust himself to bandy speech with Veery. The beating must be administered quickly, or there would be something worse. Yet how desperately hard not to try to awaken conscience or sense in this man. "No, I'm not crazy," yelled Veery. "If you're not crazy, then that trick of throwing a tarantula on your wife was damnable, mean, and hellish. Monstrous. My God, man, can't you see what a coward you are? To torture her as if you were a heathen, that delicate woman, all quivering nerves, to pick on a weakness like that of a child. Veery, if you're not crazy, you're the worst brute I've ever met on the desert. You've sunk lower than men whom the desert has made beasts. You beast I am, thanks to my delicate wife," cried Veery with exceeding bitter passion. "Delicate, ha! The last lover of Magdalene. Veery can't see she's strong as steel, alive as red fire, how she clings to memory, how she has 9 lives of a cat and hangs on to them just to remember. And you meddler, you desert rat of a preacher, get out or I'll kill you." "Shoot and be damned," flashed Adam, as with leap as swift as his voice he reached a sweeping arm. Veery's face turned to ash and he raised the gun. Adam knocked it up just as it exploded. The powder burned his forehead, but the bullet sped high. Another blow sent the gun flying to the sand. Then Adam, fastening a powerful grip on Veery, clutching shirt and collar and throat at once, dragged him before the stone bench where Miss Veery sat, wide-eyed and pale. Here Adam tripped the man and threw him heavily upon the sand. Before he could rise, Adam straddled him, bearing him down. Then Adam's big right hand swept and dug in the sand to uncover the dead tarantula. "Here's your spider," he shouted, and he rubbed the hairy, half-crushed tarantula in Veery's face. The man screamed and wrestled. "Good, you open your mouth. Now we'll see you eat this thing, you coward." Then Adam essayed to thrust the spider between Veery's own lips. He succeeded only partly. Veery let out a strangling, spitting yell, then closed his teeth as a vice. End of chapter 18, part 1.